I don't think I need to explain who Dr. Francisco Gil-White is. Search Google and you'll find a very detailed biography, but there are a few things I want to warn the audience about. This is going to be a very different video from what you're used to. You're used to hearing about current events and things like that. I want to go a bit more into the personal side, into what is rarely talked about on camera, and that's about your personal way of connecting with, let's say, the transcendent, with Hashem or with Judaism. And as you know, this page is focused on B'nai Noach, which is Noahides. But before getting into that topic, I would like to ask you why you consider Judaism to be important. That is there a role for Judaism in history? And what does Judaism mean for you, Nuli? Because you are known as a great defender of this idea.
Well, I think that Judaism is very important because it is the main protagonist in a gigantic struggle that has been taking place in civilization. Well, not only in Western civilization, but in all the civilizations included in what we could call Western Asia, which includes all of Mesopotamia and Persia, and Europe and North Africa. All of that is Western Asia. And in all those situations, in that entire geographic area for 4,300 years, there has been a struggle that is like something out of Tolkien, like the Lord of the Rings, with the forces of good on one side and the forces of evil on the other. And these forces are identifiable throughout 4,300 years. That is, a tradition is inherited on both sides. Above all, on the side of good, the tradition is uninterrupted. It's very, very old. And what I call the side of good is what I have also named as Semitism. Why? Because it was Semitic peoples who, starting with the revolution of Sargon of Akkad 4,300 years ago, were the ones who began this historical and political process of trying to create societies that are increasingly compassionate, more just, more egalitarian, and so on. That path, the path of ethics, of trying to improve politics through ethical thinking, is what I call Semitism. And, as I said, that begins with the revolution of Sargon of Akkad 4,300 years ago in what would later be called Babylon. And on the other side is anti-Semitism. Now, we are used to saying anti-Semitism or anti-Semit to refer to hatred against Jews. But once you adopt this model that I'm presenting of Semitism, of this very old movement, the term anti-Semitism then becomes the term for those who oppose Semitism. And what does that mean? Well, it means they're against ethics, they're against political equality, they're against extending rights and freedoms to everyone, and so on. So they're totalitarian, they're cruel, they're oppressive, right? And we see this in ancient times. We see the struggle of the Semitic peoples who invented Semitism and who were trying to protect a society where everyone has rights and freedoms, right? For example, the Assyrians in ancient times, the Assyrians were terrorists. And for them, the highest values were the values of war and oppressing others. And the Assyrian kings boasted in their inscriptions about the tortures they inflicted on thousands and thousands of captured prisoners, torturing them to death with many different methods of torture. And this was celebrated by the Assyrian kings. So this is Mordor, right? In Tolkien's metaphors, this is Mordor. And they were fighting against a coalition of elves and hobbits and humans who were different groups, but all in agreement that there had to be a world of laws, right? And so that Semitist movement, which had a lot of stability in Mesopotamia for 2,000 years, that's the movement that gives rise to the culture from which the Jewish people emerge. The Jewish people are the most exquisite and sophisticated product of that Semitic tradition of Mesopotamia, and it is precisely the Jewish people who bring the values of Semitism, the values of improving the political culture of human beings through the application of ethics, right? The Jews bring that to the West, they disperse everywhere. One of those places is the West, and in the West, they have a profound effect on the most anti-Semitic societies that existed on the planet, which were the Greco-Roman societies, which were dedicated to war, to oppression, to cruelty, where even they found it entertaining, for example, in Rome, to watch people being torn apart. And it was about power, about power. about power. Like going to the movies to watch someone get torn apart. So they were psychopathic societies, and the contact of the ancient Jews with these psychopathic societies, it produced a sociological miracle, because the values of Semitism that the Jews were bringing from Mesopotamia began to seduce the Greeks and the Romans and began to transform them. And that's where this incredible change occurred that set in motion the political history of the West, and after many centuries brought us to modern democracy. So, the West started with the worst societies in the world and ended up with the best societies in the world, modern democracies. And that is a consequence of its contact with Hebrew culture, which brought the values of Semitism, Mesopotamian Semitism, and converted Westerners to Semitism. They, the vast majority, still don't understand what happened because they are still anti-Semitic in the sense of hating Jews. But from the point of view of what their political culture is, they are Semitists, and they inherited that from the Jews.
But I would like to raise an objection. I know it's not the case, but it's just in case the audience might say no. On the other hand, we could say that the West was also built on Judaism as inherited through Christianity, but there's also the Greek pillar, let's say, right? Do you think that would be a great contribution? Democracy? And look at how ancient Greece has been sold to us.
There's no doubt that Greek and Roman cultures made important intellectual contributions. In Western civilization, no doubt they're there. Western civilization is a hybrid of Greco-Roman culture and Hebrew culture. We can't say it's just one or just the other, right? Western culture is simultaneously Hebrew and Greco-Roman. But what is false is the claim that the political culture of modern Western civilization, that is, constitutional, parliamentary, suffragist, rights-protecting democracy, which is the modern democracy that extends citizenship to everyone within the territory. That concept of democracy has absolutely nothing to do with the Greco-Romans. What we learned in school about politics is false. The idea of modern democracy comes entirely from Judeo-Christian culture. Why? Because in Jewish ethics, and also Christian ethics, since Christians inherit their ethics from the Jews, we believe that each individual is completely sacred, each individual is infinitely valuable, because each one is a child of God and therefore contains the divinity of God. And God loves each one individually and completely. When you have that conception of the human being, of the human individual, when you value them so highly, then you conclude that all human beings, as they all are equally and infinitely valuable in the eyes of God, their Creator. Well then, they also have to be equal before the law because we don't value them differently. Each one is equally and infinitely valuable. And that is the concept that leads you to modern democracy. The values of the Greco-Romans cannot lead you to modern democracy because they were racists who believed that some people by biological right should rule and others by biological obligation. They had to be slaves and produced enormous multitudes of slaves, and they justified everything with their own theories. They had an entire theoretical infrastructure. For example, Aristotle wrote an entire book to say, that slaves deserve to be slaves by nature. And this is the great mind of Greece, Aristotle. So no, modern democracy doesn't come from there. Modern democracy comes from the Judeo-Christian principle that each one of us is infinitely valuable.
Alright, but another objection. Okay, let's say the Judeo-Christian heritage, so why not just stop at the Christian lens? Wait, hold on. I also want to speak.
Why not just be Christians? That's the question.
For example, although I would like, first of all, to pick up on one thread here that indeed in Judaism, those who know, we say that there is the covenant at Sinai, but there is a covenant for humanity that comes before Sinai, which is the covenant with Noah and his sons, and those are the children of Noah, the Noahides. But maybe we'll talk about this later.
But then, I don't know, there are different audiences, so I think the best thing is to first tell the story of Noah, so people can understand what you're referring to. With the first covenant, which is for all humanity.
If you want to share your perspective.
Well, the story, very basically summarized, is that God's project for humanity, which is to make ethics and love for one's neighbor flourish, was not being fulfilled. So God was very disappointed with the progress of human sociology. There was obviously too much violence, iniquity, sexual assault, etc. Everything that offends God was happening. And so God makes the decision to call game over, to put an end to the simulation. We're going to abort, we're going to reset, and we're going to go back exactly to start over.
Right?
We're going to make a new attempt. He thinks he can salvage a little piece of that first attempt, which is Noah's family, right? And then he tells Noah, he says, prepare a vessel because I'm going to flood all of this. And so Noah listens and starts building a vessel. It has to be big enough to carry Noah's family, and also a pair of each species, right? To be able to repopulate the earth, right? So that when the waters disappear again and the land reappears, the planet can be repopulated, right?
So,
they make fun of Noah, but he listens. And he builds the boat, even though obviously there's no water yet, but he builds the boat and starts filling it with animals. His family boards, it rains as God promised, and the world floods, drowning everyone. And after, I don't know how many days like that, the numbers, I never remember how many there were.
a year?
After a year, finally the waters recede and the land reappears, and then all the animals come down. Noah's family begins the work of repopulating the earth. We're not going to get into the details, right? And well, the Lord does two interesting things. One, he expresses regret for what he just did. It's like he realizes that this was a crime, he killed all of humanity. If a person did this, we'd call it the worst crime imaginable. So it's like he realizes the crime he committed and promises not to do it again. I find that very interesting. It's a God who can make mistakes, repent, and improve his behavior. I find that very interesting. And then he says, when you see the rainbow, let that remind you that this is my promise that I will never do this again. I'm not going to do it again. Don't worry. It's like a kind of contract that is reaffirmed every time we see the rainbow. And the other thing he does, which I find very interesting, and this is the part that connects us with the story of the Noahides, is that he issues for Noah and all his descendants a series of laws, which are 7, which are I've heard, I think it was Rabbi Shirky actually say that they're not really laws, they're principles. They're like the basic principles of ethics. The text calls them commandments, I suppose, but I think I agree with the rabbi. These are fundamental principles, not laws. Don't hurt others, don't betray your wife, don't torture animals. These kinds of things are contained in the 7 laws. But I find it very interesting that after stating 6 basic principles, the 7th law of Noah for Noah and all his descendants is, you shall establish courts. So, what are you telling us? Oh, well, those are going to be laws, those are going to be commandments. And every society needs a legal structure to resolve disputes peacefully and to pursue criminals and all that. And that obviously is already a specific body of laws, but of course they will have to be consistent with the first 6 principles. So since we know that God is later going to produce the Jewish people, then retroactively it's obvious that what's happening here is that God is saying, well, not everyone is going to be Jewish, nor do they have to be Jewish, but for those who are not Jewish, this is what they absolutely have to do. They have to follow the 7 laws of Noah. And so the 7th law is saying, well, establish a system of courts as you see fit according to your customs that can vary. It just has to be consistent with the very basic principles of ethics so that humans can live in peace.
Yes, in fact, as you say, for people they're called the 7 Noahide laws, but as you rightly pointed out, they're not really laws. They're more like principles, like categories. Helman Cohen develops it. He is a neo-Kantian. So he says they're like 7 categorical imperatives, but yes, that's how we see it. That's why I don't consider that the Noahide laws are a religion. It's not homogeneous. A Noahide in Japan won't have the same legal system as one in Mexico, since Japan's anthropological and sociological developments differ, so he'll apply Noahide laws differently.
I disagree. I believe Noahidism is a religion.
In what way?
Because I think that the religion of the Noahide is Judaism.
Okay, that's powerful. Okay, I don't see Judaism as a religion.
Okay? Okay, in that case, no.
Yes, but you're right. Some people claim there's Judaism and Noahidism, but I disagree. The Noahides are part of Judaism. It's an idea that encompasses, as you put it, Semitism. It's just that it was called Judaism, but it's not no.
But even more specifically, yes, it's true that the Noahide is within the stream of Semitism, but it's also more specifically within the stream of Judaism.
Judaism?
Noahidism, I agree. Noahidism is part of Judaism. You're not Jewish, but you are within Judaism.
Exactly.
That's the distinction.
I want to return to the question I haven't asked yet. Alright, Western society, these 2 great pillars, there's Greece, Greco-Roman, and Judeo-Christian. Why not stop? Why should someone stop at the Christian filter to understand reality? Why use the Jewish filter?
I mean, why would a Christian abandon their Christianity to become a Noahide?
That's the question.
Doesn't Christianity already contain everything they need?
And I take it from your own context, because if you say that the society we've created has been such and such, it's because of the Judeo-Christian context.
Correct.
Why then get rid of this perspective?
I think that's a very good question, because it's certainly true that Christianity is within the Semitic tradition. Without a doubt, because Christianity contains a Jewish ethic. The ethics of Christianity come from nowhere else but Judaism. So the ethics of Christians were inherited from the Jews, from the Jewish people. So one could say, well, that's it. Christianity is already within the Semitic tradition. It already has a Jewish ethic. The Noahide project obviously is blessing the nations of the planet with Jewish ethics, obviously. That is the Noahide project. Well, if Christians already have a Jewish ethic, why would they become Noahides? That's it. They're already Christians, right? Except that Christianity is not only Semitic, it's also anti-Semitic. Christianity is a kind of hybrid creature. It's a paradoxical dual creature because it's at the same time a Semitic culture in the sense that it's a Hebrew culture in one sense. In another sense, it's a Greco-Roman culture. Because Christianity very quickly, well, first of all, Christianity grew mainly among the Hellenized peoples of the Eastern Mediterranean, among people of Greek culture. That was the fertile ground in which Christianity grew very quickly in its early stage. First point. And that's why all the Christian texts are in Greek. They're all in Greek. First point. Second point. Second. Christianity very quickly became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And it acquired aristocratic power by becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire. And in fact, it began to merge with the empire, and very soon the bishops were already performing civil functions, and in their courts, civil cases were also decided. The church became closely identified with the power of Rome and with Roman culture. That's why the bishops' councils were modeled after those of the Senate. Latin became the sacred language. In short, there's a lot of Greco-Roman culture within the church tradition. And a fundamental aspect of Greco-Roman culture that the Catholic Church adopted was the hatred toward the Jewish people. The pagan Roman Empire already harbored hatred toward Jewish people and committed genocide against them in the 1st and 2nd centuries. Well, from the year 63 BC until the defeat of Bar Kokhba in the year 135. For those 200 years, the Roman Empire was killing Jews, and there was an attempt. It was organized, a deliberate genocidal attack. In fact, historians of that genocide estimate that proportionally the Romans killed more Jews than Hitler, proportionally speaking, as a percentage of the population. This was a massive slaughter. What they did was incredible, gigantic. And that hatred that the Roman Empire had for the Jewish people, it passes it on to its official religion, which is the church. Which in any case has, well, it's, let's say, how could we put it? It's kind of woven in, intertwined and grounded in its own theology. The hatred of the Jew, because that's what the central story of Christianity claims. Is that the Jews killed God? That's Paul's theology. And so it becomes very difficult to love someone who killed your God. So, when you have that story in your head, fostering a hatred of Jews isn't too difficult. You already think they killed God, which is an almost inconceivable crime, kind of satanic. It requires not only a lot of evil, but also a lot of power. So it combines the fear of evil, which the Jew supposedly represents, but also the fear of power. They were able to kill God. So hatred mixes with phobia, creating a kind of super hatred. And that has always been part of the doctrinal experience and also of propaganda, as well as politics, of the Catholic Church. For centuries, it organized massive persecutions, massacres, forced conversions, and expulsions of Jews. This why, well, as a whole, all of that led to another genocide, the genocide of the Middle Ages, because throughout the centuries of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, what we call Western Europe, was practically emptied of Jews. That's why when Hitler started the next genocide, I mean, almost 90% of the Jews who perished in the Shoah were Eastern European Jews, because they were the ones who were left. Because this had already been done, they had already wiped out the Western Jews. So, to finish answering your question, it makes sense to abandon Christianity and to become a Noahide. Because the movement from Christianity to Noahidism makes us purer. It makes us more pro-Semitic without the negative baggage of the New Testament, which speaks so badly of the Jews in a very unfair way. Not only does it have nothing to do with historical truth, but it's also a Roman tale. But also it doesn't match at all with the ethics of Judaism. It never invites us to hate anyone. There shouldn't be any demonized people. The whole project of Judaism is to create brotherhood among all peoples. That's the project. And precisely what does Noahidism do? Noahidism says everyone is welcome in Judaism. You don't even have to, if you want to convert to Judaism, go ahead. But everyone is welcome in Judaism even if they don't want to convert to Judaism. And there can't be a more tolerant position than that.
In fact, something I noticed a lot in this conflict we're living through, it's that many of the people I can analyze are Christians, Protestants, Zionists, but I also see that at the same time, there's this, like they can't quite shake off the shadow. Like they say, no, I support Israel, but Judaism is something else. I can't support Judaism because of what you said. Of course.
Claro, claro.
Pero acá es que hay muchas cosas. It's just that.
It's been many centuries of hearing that Jews are bad. It's been many centuries. I mean, all of Christian civilization. People don't realize this. All of Christian civilization was built on the story that the Jews killed God. That's the
central story. But how does this actually play out in practice?
How? If you build an entire civilization around the idea that the Jews killed God, in that civilization there will be. Again and again there will be anti-Jewish massacres, of course. Of course. And it will be very difficult in that civilization to completely erase the suspicion that Christians feel toward Jews. It's very difficult to completely erase that because it's been many centuries of hearing it. And in the holy books, Jews are spoken of very badly. The texts of the New Testament. They are very harsh toward the Jews. They claim that the Jews were responsible for the execution of Jesus. How outrageous. Look, it's absurd. The idea sold to people is that the Jews of ancient times, they pressured the Roman governor so that he would kill one of them who was trying to be the Messiah.
It's absurd.
If we put it in those terms. The thing is, people don't know what it means to try to be the Messiah. For the Jews, the Messiah is a political redeemer. The Messiah is a holy warrior who defeats the oppressor and physically frees the slaves. That's the Jewish Messiah. So, if you bring the context we just mentioned into the modern world, you would be saying que los judíos europeos in Auschwitz, they organized to pressure the guards who controlled the death camp to execute one of them who was trying to help them escape from Auschwitz. That's what's being claimed about Jesus' death, just as it would be in today's world. Obviously, the Jews of ancient times, they wanted a Messiah. There were several contenders to the title of Messiah, and many people followed them because people weren't offended by someone trying to be the Messiah. People were waiting for the Messiah, eager to identify him, and at several moments. There were contenders for the title of Messiah who were followed by many Jews because they wanted to fight against Rome. Because that's what it meant. It meant a political redeemer. Obviously, the Jews of ancient times who lived with the Roman boot on their necks. A mob of Jews wouldn't have gathered to threaten the Roman governor who was their oppressor, who was enslaving them, because the Romans were very cruel, as we already said. How are they going to threaten the Roman governor with a revolt if they don't kill the one who was trying to free them? It doesn't make sense. That's the story they've been told. And when you hear it over centuries and centuries, and it's passed down from parents to children, a historical weight builds up that makes it hard to emancipate people from this very anti-Jewish idea that has dominated the mindset of the West.
I have it here, but many questions arise. Two things. Either one should be addressed first. If you claim that Western society is an inheritance from Judaism and that together with other inheritances, the West was founded. But also Islam. Islam has many things, let's say, you could call them Abrahamic, I don't know how to call them, and that's where it comes from. So how can it be explained then? That among currents within Islam there is so much hostility against Judaism, against Jews, if it also has such a heritage, and that kind of heritage?
Well, you would say that it's the principle. Fundamental principle that organizes Islam, if you had to summarize it, in something very concise and full of meaning, useful for understanding Islam. What would you say is the fundamental principle of Islam?
Perhaps the factor of political expansion.
What is political expansion in Islam? How does it work?
Anyway, no.
They have a preferred method.
Well, there it is. If you do it in terms of jihad, exactly. Or in terms of dawah, peacefully. That is through social action, of course.
But it has greater value.
And which one has been used? Jihad.
Jihad has been central. And when you're talking about dawah, anyway. If it can't be done peacefully, the Islamic law, then you move on to force. So actually,
they converge.
Actually, sometimes you just want to save yourself a lot of work. And if it can be done peacefully, if people submit to Islam peacefully, well, that's great. You didn't have to threaten them anymore. You didn't have to carry out a massacre. You can rest. Maybe you have to work tomorrow, but today you rest. It's kind of like that. But if it can't be done peacefully, the rule is you go to jihad. So, the central concept is jihad. And what is jihad? Jihad is to force the infidels to convert to Islam, and if they don't, you kill them. So, that doesn't sound right to me. To the ethics of Judaism. To you it does.
No, because there is no desire to expand and conquer ideologically.
Not only that, What would be the fundamental principle of Judaism if you had to reduce it to one thing like that, as compressed as we just did for?
For Islam, maybe liberation, freedom.
What would be the commandment that sums it all up?
Hashem, monotheism. Where are you heading?
All right. Where am I heading? That's the answer that Rabbi Hillel the Elder gave to that question.
What was it? Love your neighbor, or simply don't treat others in ways you wouldn't want. Exactly.
So, I love that story, because it turns out that Rabbi Hillel the Elder, he is the most influential rabbi of all time, because he is the origin of Jewish jurisprudence. The Mishnah begins with Hillel. So, Hillel is the most influential rabbi of all time. All of rabbinic Judaism is a consequence of Hillel. And when they asked Hillel, what is the principle that sums up all Jewish legal, ethical, and political thought? He answered, Leviticus 19:18. You shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. So, just notice the difference. The principle that sums up all of Judaism is, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. No less, as you love yourself. Whereas the principle that sums up the fundamental nature of Islam is, repeat what I say or I'll kill you. In my opinion, that alone proves that it's impossible for Islam to have descended from Judaism. That's a scam. It's not true. It's a lie. It's a lie that Muslims tell about themselves. But we have no obligation to accept it if the evidence doesn't match.
With that statement, even if you find stories that match things from the Tanakh, maybe a little different, variations.
But why? Why is that hard to... Why would that be a confirmation of its origin in Judaism?
Because if our values, let's say, are in the Tanakh, and the Quran absorbs.
But the Quran doesn't have those values. We just said that.
You tell the stories, but not the values behind the stories.
I mean, if you create a movement that has absolutely nothing to do with Judaism and its values, then it has nothing to do with Judaism. Judaism without its values is nothing. Gilel said it. They asked him what Judaism is. Judaism is, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That is a value, the supreme value. That is the value that organizes all ethical thought. Because without that principle, you can't do ethics. And that principle is precisely the one that Islam does not have. Because Islam wants to kill everyone who does not agree with Islam. That is the opposite of ethics.
Of course. But a religious hegemony where everyone truly thinks according to that model. Here's another question then. Atheism, let's say, or I don't want to say atheism, rather the lack of ideology leaves a void in society. And new ideologies start to emerge, like Wokism. Don't you think that, in a way, Wokism and all these new ideologies are also a product of the West? Couldn't you say that maybe it's the next level, the next step? Because, let's see, Western society has gotten to where we are now. One step is moving toward being woke, considering poverty and similar issues. And another choice would be to become a Noahide, because a person wouldn't choose. What would be the big difference? That's the variable here.
I think all these things can be measured with the standard that Hillel gave us. So if an ideology is harming others, well then participating in that ideology is not loving your neighbor as yourself. Because in that ideology you are harming others. So that's the standard by which we can measure any ideology. If being woke is improving the conditions of others, well then it's worth considering. But if being woke is harming others, then obviously it's not superior to Judaism. So why should we change? We already have Judaism, we already have the superior product. And what I see is that in being woke, for example, it is claimed that if a boy suddenly says, I'm a girl, then they should be given hormones and surgeries and change them, disfigure them for the rest of their life and ruin their reproductive potential. And this is obviously harm. Any idiot should be able to see it in a second. But woke ideology drives people so crazy that it becomes hard for them once they're operating within the grammatical rules of woke thinking. It's hard for them to realize that that they're hurting people, because within woke ideology, declared identity is the only thing that matters.
Okay.
Yes? That's not really an identity. It's a...
Lack of...
Of course. It's trivializing identity so much that it becomes like a piece of clothing. It's the same as not having a real identity. You've trivialized it so much that it's nothing anymore. And that's what they've done with identity in the woke movement, and that's also hurt people. People are in an identity crisis. Precisely because identity has been trivialized in this way.
Yes. I think, in fact, for those who don't know, the doctor was recently with one of the great thinkers on Instagram. And it's precisely from Sable Cerebro. That's right, Moshe Feiglin.
Who is a great philosopher of identity. And the book he just published, which was released in Hebrew, but will soon be available in English as well, and I hope it will also be available in Spanish soon. It's called precisely Man in Search of Identity. Man in Search of Identity.
We were that generation.
And now that I interviewed him, I said the title wrong when I translated it, Man's Search for Meaning. And he told me, that's not exactly the title. He tells me, but almost, because without a doubt the words identity and meaning have a deep relationship. Because it becomes much harder to give meaning to your life when you don't have an identity. I mean, that's a big challenge. But when you have a well-formed and anchored identity, then meaning is not only possible, but probable, that your life will have a satisfying meaning. So I'm glad I made that mistake, because that's a valuable reflection.
It seems to me that it's deliberate. No, I honestly made a mistake. No, it's on your part. It's like Franklin's, right? I think so.
It could be.
It could be. Now, to wrap this up, well, you were on Israeli television and everything, yes. But it makes me very happy that you met my rabbi, who is Rabbi Uri Shirky. Yes, sir. Can you tell about your...
Well, it was incredible to talk with Rabbi Shirky, because obviously he is a great ha-ha-ha.
If you permit, Rabbi Uri Shirky founded the World Noahide Center and, in my view, is one of this generation's great rabbis. He is truly an eminence, a scholar, and well, yes.
Indeed, I had the great honor of interviewing Rabbi Shirky, and we were talking precisely about the Noahide movement. And in fact, I would like to tell you an anecdote from that interview, because it illustrates the greatness of Rabbi Shirky, but through him, the greatness of Jewish culture. Because Judaism is a culture of free thought, of rational debate, of dissent, of courteously tolerated dispute. We may get heated, but we never become enemies, and everything is discussed. There are no taboos. Everything can be talked about. This is the culture of Judaism. And I liked how Rabbi Shirky embodied it in our conversation, because he was explaining it to me since I was asking him about Christians. How do the rules of Noahide culture work? I told him, because I consider myself a Noahide, but I also don't know all the rules, regulations, or how the rabbis relate to Noahide culture. I don't know any of this. So he was explaining to me that to become a Noahide, a Christian has to leave Christianity. So first you renounce Christianity, and then you can declare yourself a Noahide. And I said to him, well, what does one do? Well, you have to profess, you have to convert in front of 3 rabbis, and there's a kind of ceremony. I said to him, well, let's see when we can schedule it so I can formally declare myself a Noahide. And I'm going to love that. And he says to me, but Muslims don't have to renounce their faith to profess Noahidism? And I said, what? And I was very surprised. I said to him, why not? And he said to me, well, because Muslims are not idolaters and Christians are. I understand Rabbi Shirky, because in Christianity, though maybe not in Protestantism, there has often been concern about not turning Christianity into just a religion. But which Christian doesn't, and I think the rabbi didn't phrase that very carefully, because I think he was talking about Catholicism. Because in Catholicism, there are certainly many practices that, from the point of view of Judaism, are definitely idolatrous, right? The worship of saints, all those images of God, etc., all of that for a Jew are representations that are totally forbidden by the first commandment. So I understand that he was referring to that, and in Islam they are also careful not to make representations of God, and therefore, in the rabbi's opinion, Since Christians are idolaters, they do have to renounce Christianity. Since Muslims are not idolaters, they don't. They can remain within Islam and profess Noahidism. I told him, Rabbi, I'm very surprised by this opinion.
I said him.
Because while I understand that Muslims are careful with the first commandment, are they failing the commandment that Hillel the elder said was the foundation of all the law? Because for them, the center of their activity is, if they can't subdue you, they kill you. And that, I believe they must renounce if they are going to be Noahides, because that principle is not consistent with the laws of Noah. And then the rabbi smiled. And he said to me, we should talk more about this to see if you can convince me that Muslims have to renounce Islam before converting to Noahidism. And I was left thinking, wow, this is a world leader of the Noahide movement, right? See?
Yes.
He is the most influential figure in Noahidism. And who am I in the Noahide movement? Nothing. I'm just another one. And I'm challenging him. I'm challenging him in a program that's going to be published about the rule of how to become a Noahide. And this man, instead of telling me, you don't know anything, I make the rules, or that's how it is, you don't understand. No, he said, He saw an interesting argument and he said to me, well, we need to talk about this more. Maybe you'll convince me. How could there be a better example of intellectual humility? The kind that Judaism invites us to, because what you don't see in Rabbi Shirky is arrogance. The arrogance of a person who obviously knows a lot, as Rabbi Shirky obviously does. And who also holds a position of institutional prestige in Noahidism. And yet with complete freedom he said, well, this should be considered.
I loved it. Impressive. In fact, he is also knowledgeable about Islam. He has been invited to countries in the Islamic world. On these topics, I think that regarding the issue of idolatry in Christianity, I don't think he's referring so much to the visible signs like iconography and all that, but rather to the fact of embodying God, that is, limiting the infinite to a human being. I think that's the idolatry. In that, almost all branches share this, of course.
I mean, we could say that I missed some other dimensions in which Christians could already be called idolaters from the Jewish point of view.
Yes, which is the reduction of God. And about Islam, I think he does so in practical terms, because in Islam there's a law that if you abandon Islam, you get the death penalty.
If you become an apostate, you get the death penalty.
Exactly. So I think that for him, there are many people in the world of Islam who have this approach. The World Logistics Center has divisions. One is the Arab division, which is secret. And the members don't reveal their names, their groups, or anything, because if they find out, it's very bad, and they face the death penalty. And that's why, I think that's why for now there is this permission, let's say, so that they don't have to express openly,
That makes a lot of sense.
Yes, since they're going to the mosque. Exactly.
Exactly. So the issue isn't theological, the issue is pragmatic. It's about protecting their lives.
Exactly. It's a totally pragmatic issue, and I think that's why Raphael has written about it on other occasions. That it should be taken from the Torah of Moses, not from Muhammad. That wouldn't make sense. But in practical terms, his conclusion is that it is. And by...
Why do you think then that Rabbi Shirky defended the distinction in terms of idolatry?
Because that's what Maimonides says. Maimonides says that at the time of, and about the topic of Noahides, letters to the students of Rabbi Ephraim.
Yes.
Maimonides makes exactly this distinction. It's based on that, I think.
But I don't think Rambam would have thought that a Muslim could be Noahide without giving up the goal of killing infidels.
I also don't think Maimonides decided this, of course.
It's impossible. We already know that's not the case. I mean, look, Maimonides is a great teacher of ethics. Obviously, he understands, because anyone would understand, that if you haven't renounced killing the infidels, then you can't be a Noahide.
No, this is clear. In the Epistle to Yemen, Maimonides harshly criticizes all the harm that Islam has done to him. Of course. Yes, he understands it now more than ever and experiences it firsthand. He was expelled from Spain. In fact, he says,
no one has harmed us as much as the Muslims. That's what Maimonides says.
Exactly. Well, thank you for being here. On the contrary, thank you all. Greetings from Israel.